Simon Robertson, who were both slotted to go in the first round and didn't, and were still available at the end of the second. But at the same time, with young players, you never know, right? And there are like these like glimpses of high end skill and tremendous playmaking, and just need to find some more consistency. But there is hope for this. And Scott, I'm not quite sure what you want to add to this, and if you have a different perspective from me.
Well, Scott, let me tie you into something first, if you don't mind. I'm really, really sorry to interject here. One of the most interesting things you said, Sebastian, was how Elite Prospect didn't rank him. Now, let's take away the fact that last year's draft was an absolute mumble jumbo. I mean, players were all over the place. I'm not going to make the same Ottawa Senators joke once again. But let me read you, Scott, and I want you to react to this. I'm going to read you word for word what Elite Prospect says. Okay, this is from the Elite Prospects 2021 NHL Draft Guide. And I quote, "The winger's tools, especially his puck handling abilities and his offensive habits, the way he attacks at a high pace, scans before getting the puck, and receives every one of them in motion, kept us watching over the course of the season. He has real problem-solving skills. You see him bounce the puck off his skates and instantly dangle through defenders." Our guy was 5'11", 168 pounds. You know, okay, he's plays center. He could play wing as well, apparently. He's been captain of his Bantam team. He's been assistant captain for Team Nova Scotia. And it doesn't sound that bad. I mean, you know, like, if anything, it's like, wow, okay, he's a prototypical speedy dangler. Like, or like, are we just exaggerating the fact that he sounds like Patrick Kane? Or is there really a huge downside to his game that makes it, you know what, maybe he was drafted a little too quickly and maybe he'll be a bust?
A number of factors, I think, to take into consideration when you talk about Kidney's game and also the team he's played for. Like Sebastian, I personally would have taken Sasha Pastujov at this position. I liked him a lot more, and he was a guy I also took in the first round of my mock draft. He fell quite a bit, but that's besides the point. The thing about Kidney, that's another thing that's important to note, is that the Academy Bathurst Titan were horrible when he played there his first season. They only won 12 games. They won 8 games the year before. They suffered from what a lot of teams suffer from, which is most of their top players go on to the NHL, and then the team has nothing left to work with, so they have to rebuild. But he definitely managed to improve his performance over the course of the season. And at this point in the draft, even at the second round, it's basically a 50-50 draw when it comes to how guys are going to turn out. The Canadiens drafted based on upside in this case, and they actually made a number of picks that were based on upside, like Joshua Waugh in the 5th round. And I definitely think that Waugh and Kidney actually have a lot in similar, both being fairly young at 18 and 17 respectively, both having a lot of upside, both being very talented players offensively, and both having put up some immensely impressive numbers. I know that Sebastian said about secondary assists and how that does technically contribute a lot to Kidney's pretty impressive offensive statistics, but he still recorded 15 assists over 9 games in the playoffs, which is still nothing really to shake a stick at for an 18-year-old player, and especially on a team that doesn't really have much in the way of big-name players. The last big-name guys that the Acadie Buffers Titan had were Noah Dobson, Antoine Morin a long time ago. So nowadays, Kidney's just standing out on a team that maybe doesn't have quite the big star guys that other QMJHL teams have. And I feel like that's something to be admired and even looked at in the future. I definitely think he has a lot of upside, and he'll be a player to look out for.
If I can just add one more thing. So, Patrick, you brought up the elite prospects, what they're saying. Well, I'm not quite sure if it comes up on like just a little like summary when you look on his elite prospects page, is that the guide also says that he lacks manipulation abilities, right? So he's a dangler, but he doesn't shift his body weight particularly effectively to actually deceive his opponents, where it's a lot just like stick in front, move puck side to side, which is the most effective thing if you can't actually deceive your opponents. So that'd be one thing. Or like, sure, you can be as good as a dangler ever, but if you can't actually like convince your opponent you're going left when you're going to go right, does it matter? Another thing is that Elite Prospect was also saying that while he is a skilled player in the QMJHL, they are just not convinced that he's going to be able to translate that skill. So not only did they not rank him, I'm almost convinced that they put him they gave him an F grade. So of all the players that they ranked, the ones that actually made their final ranking were between A and C. Joshua Roy, for instance, I believe that had a C ranking, but was not ranked. But he was like right on the brink of being ranked, whereas Riley Kidney was way down on their list because they saw him as a skilled QMJHL player, and they just saw no signs of him being able to actually translate that.
I'll definitely go with you on that one, Sebastian.
Let me ask you, in round 5, 142nd overall from St. Petersburg, Russia, Daniel Sobolev. I love late draft picks because you never know what to expect. Like we know we've heard all the millions of stories, about, like, hey, we drafted Patrick Roy in the 4th round, for example, right? I mean, you never know, like, what can come out. So, I mean, like, have you heard anything about him? I mean, what's your take on drafting Sobolev?
So we're going back to a defenseman that we talked about previously, whose name is now skipping my mind. I think Sebastian would probably refill me on that defense we talked about the last time from the Canadiens.
Kostenko or Trudeau?
It was Kostenko, because much like Kostenko, Sobolev is another MHL player who's been playing mostly in Russia's junior league for the past few seasons. And in fact, he's yet to make his debut in the VHL or even the KHL. So he spent his entire past season in the MHL. And is now
committed. He didn't play. He did not play last season.
Oh, yes, that's a very good point to make. He was committed to play for the Windsor Spitfires, but yeah, the OHL season ends up being canceled. The thing is, at this late in the draft, and unless they have a good story, Sobolev's a guy who there isn't really a whole lot to really bring up regarding his ability, at least at first glance. I know Sebastian can obviously fill in right there. But even for a person like myself, who is a big fan of the NHL draft and a big fan of prospects, my focus was tuned towards guys like Joshua Wong and Xavier Simoneau, who took up most people's attention because of their stories. Well, at this late in the draft, a lot of the thing that drives a lot of people to these players is their stories. Simoneau managed to benefit from the fact that he was passed over in 2 NHL drafts. He was very small. He had comparisons to David Desharnais. And while I still think Solo is a really talented player, he's a very solid defensive defenseman at his core. He's big. He's strong. I mean, if you see some pictures of him online, he's absolutely in fantastic shape for a guy at his age. And he's been a fixture on Russia's junior teams for the past few seasons. And it'll be interesting to see where he goes from here. But for the time being, I definitely think he's more grouped into an Arsen Kisselmadinov kind of guy who Montreal's going to be looking at maybe to contribute for Laval in the future. But I'll let Sebastian fill in and go with his opinion on this one.
Yeah, so Sobolev is one of my favorite picks of this draft. I can't say I was overly familiar with him before the draft actually took place. It was one of these names that I'd recognized, but because the OHL season didn't occur, I didn't get a chance to watch him. But during the draft, like David St. Louis, who is Elite Prospects, like QMJHL scout, he tweeted out that Sobolev was like the first player that the Habs drafted in the draft that he was actually really, really excited about. And while Sobolev did not crack the Elite Prospects ranking, that was despite David St. Louis' best efforts, because he clearly is a fairly big fan of the players. And that interest like really piqued mine, and I figured, okay, I'll go and watch some of his old games, and I watched 2 of them, which is a very small sample size, so I can't speak in like definitives here. But what I saw really correlated a lot with what David St. Louis was saying of that Sobolev is like a really engaging defenseman, right? So like whenever like on the rush or whenever, he's very aggressive, right? So he always attacks the puck. He's not passive in any way. It's like he snuffs out chances as soon as they come up. And I went back and watched some games, and like again, it's a lower tier of Russian hockey, so it's always up in the air. But he was really good. Like he was like really strong, really confident. There was no hesitation in this game, which is something that I always appreciate in young defensemen, when they're confident in making their plays, right? And then if they make a mistake, it's like, fine, right? Like you're going to make a mistake at some point, but at least make a mistake when you're confident about the choice that you made. And that's something that I saw quite a bit. And it'll be really fun to see what he does in the OHL this season, because he'll be playing against like great prospects like Shane Wright, and just seeing how he like goes about handling like really high level skill players will be really interesting. And if he can like still keep that core of his defensive game of just snuffing out chances and pushing to the outside. And yeah, like he's a defensive defenseman, so like don't look at him to be a big point producer even in the OHL, but he has a decent shot, so he'll score some goals, but it's not the core of his game. But he's a very modern defensive specialist. He's very smart in his play, very aggressive, and he is like constantly high effort, right? Like he never takes a shift off, constant high effort of engaging the play. And it's just my kind of defenseman that I enjoy watching.
I think a good point to throw really quick is that if Alexei Evelyn was able to make his Habs debut 5 years after they drafted him, I think anything's possible at Sobolev.
Exactly.
Another story that we always love, aside from the late draftees, are the undrafted. Now, of course, we got the famous ones like Martin Saint Louis, Dan Boyle, Eddie Belfour, Jeff Courtnall, Steve Duchesne. I think Dino Ciccarelli as well was one of them. I think Rocco would appreciate a little blast from the past there. And Scott has brought this up to me, and you know what? We're gonna take the time to talk about this because it's always a risky thing, but hey, why not? Scott, you wanted to talk about two players in particular, Bailey Peach and Luke Toporowski. Now, these are names that, to the common listener are absolutely okay. Who the heck are you? So fill us in, please, with a little bio. And why are these guys worth mentioning now that they've passed over not once, but twice, but 7 times by every organization in the NHL?
I mentioned this a few times in prior episodes, but the guys I typically choose to follow, like Sebastian, are typically really random choices. I just kind of pick up on guys and then I follow them on and off. And most of the time, it's just very random players who most of the time I want to have a reason to follow, but they just kind of appeared on my radar. Case in point, Olivier Archambault was that kind of player, and I've been following him since 2016. Now, as for Luke Toporowski and Billy Peach, Toporowski I've actually been following for the past couple of seasons, and that's mainly due to his relation to another former minor league enforcer who I was a big fan of, Kerry Toporowski, who is his father. Kerry was a defenseman in the IHL, the ECHL, and the UHL, put up 413 penalty minutes in the 2000 season, was known as one of the toughest guys in the league, played for the Quad City Mallards, actually had a bobblehead made of him, which is a pretty interesting little fact right there. And his son definitely carries over parts of his game, but he's actually his own player, and he's a very talented one at that. Now, for the past few seasons, he's been playing mainly in the WHL. This past season, he played in the USHL due to the WHL season being canceled. And yeah, he's just a very talented two-way player. He's a left winger. He's solid defensively. He can score a little bit, and he plays a very up-tempo game. And he has a relentless work ethic, which for an undrafted player is a really, really good quality to have. Now, while he hasn't really been ranked by any major outlets, he's had a few stories written about him here and there due to his relation, and just so he posted some really solid numbers: 60 points in 62 games in 2019-20, and 33 points in 32 games in 2020-21. Now, while I don't think he is ready to have an NHL contract just yet, I think he's a perfect candidate to see an AHL contract, and I have no doubt that he'll be able to get one come the start of the season. And I think that there'll be a team who's willing to take a chance on him, that being if he chooses to go professional or just go over to U Sports or whatever. Leading on from that, Billy Peach is another guy who I've been picking up on and off, and I've seen a bit of his numbers here and there. And there's definitely a lot of Billy Peaches who have come out of the QMJHL and junior. I mean, another point to make is Mitchell Balmas, who was an 80 point player with the Cape Breton Screaming Eagles, who now plays for the St. Mary's University. So he went over to U Sports. And Peach is one of those guys who just kind of bounced around the queue of a bunch of different teams and never really found a home. And when he finally got himself going offensively, he was at the wrong place in the wrong time, whether it be as an overager or whether it be with just the wrong team or the wrong system or whatever. And again, like Toporowski, he's a really solid player, but I think he has more of an offensive side to his game than Toporowski. And he definitely produces a lot more on the offensive side of things, and he's a bit more of a power play contributor. He just didn't really find the right team to gel with at the QMGHL, and he was never really given a proper chance. Now it remains to be seen again whether he'll go over to play U Sports or he'll get a professional contract. But in both these cases, I think these guys are ones to watch out for in the AHL come next season.
Well, we've seen it more than once. Guys who've been passed over more than 1 year, and for Habs fans, the dream is still attainable. I mean, I'm going to go back to 95 again, unfortunately, because thank you, Joshua, for bringing up that painful memory. But for those that remember in that infamous Patrick Watt trade, we also traded our captain, Mike Keane, who, by the way, has never been drafted as well. Thanks a lot, guys. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, we are finally at the final segment of the night. That was kind of redundant. Finally, final. But you know what? We have to talk about the elephant in the room. I know. By the time you've listened to this podcast, maybe some news have come out. Maybe KK signed. Maybe the Canadians decided to retain him. But for the time being, by the time we are recording this, we're Thursday evening. The episode's coming on Friday morning. Obviously, if you're listening to our show, you would like to know about all of our infinite wisdom and witty comments. So here goes. Jesperi Kotkaniemi. Now, unless you've been living under a rock for the last week, but, I'm guessing you guys know the news. So let's just do a quick recap. The Carolina Hurricanes, or more specifically Tom Dundon, the owner of the Carolina Hurricanes because general manager